Welcome to Better Leaders, the podcast, where we surface good leadership and smart management in media and beyond. Today, I'm talking to Shazna Nessa, Global Head of Visuals at the Wall Street Journal. My name is Anita Zilina, and I'm your host. Welcome to Better Leaders. Hi, Shazna. It's a pleasure to have you here with me today. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Anita. Great to be here.
Well, for some of our listeners who might not know you personally or know you well, do you maybe want to get started, since we'll be talking about leadership, about careers, about personal leadership today? Do you want to give us a short overview of what you're doing today, how you came to what you're doing today, like a tiny little kind of career journey overview?
Yeah. So today I'm a masthead editor at the Wall Street Journal, and sort of very technically, I'm the chief visuals editor. So I oversee all of our visual journalism. Anybody who knows our industry knows that visual journalism inherently has a lot of sort of transformation, change management baked into it, because it hasn't naturally been the DNA in the DNA of a lot of places. So I have a team of about 100 people with different specialized skills. They're all journalists, but they have different toolkits, different perspectives of the world and how they look at it. But my career actually started in tech, and it was in the early days of the web. It was a very exciting time, and I really thought that I would have a long career in technology, and specifically internet technology. And then I was still young enough to completely pivot, and I was recruited by a woman from the Associated Press. I lived in Paris at the time, and that's how I got into journalism. And I think there is a correlation between what I was doing then and journalism, because back then it was just this giddy excitement that we could facilitate people being able to self-publish. They could write whatever they wanted. They could take digital pictures. They could design their pages, web presence. Back then, the web was much flatter, and it was much easier to do things like that, and publish. And that was really, really exciting to me. And I think sort of that vein has carried through to what I do today.
Amazing. And I mean, very clearly put, the job you have now is a big job. It's a big job in a big media organization with a lot of responsibility, with quite a big team. Was that always kind of a plan? Did you always know or think that you'd want a career with big leadership roles?
I giggle a little bit, Anita, because I was thinking about this just before we jumped on this recording. I'm not much of a planner. I feel like I come from a period where you didn't even know what 1 month would look like, because everything was changing so quickly, and possibly we're still a little bit in that phase. No, I certainly did not. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to create work that used personal expression to show the world, to share with the world, or not, or in private. I used to have a terrible, now I think about it, it sounds really arrogant. I used to say, I don't want to be a journalist. I'm going to be the person that journalists interview. And then here's my long career in journalism, albeit you're interviewing me right now. So maybe I got the best of both worlds. No, I did not plan this. In fact, I probably, like a lot of people, never thought, had like a lot of young people thought that being a manager of a big team was awful. It was like the devil. You're the man now. But now I really encourage my teams to become, to strive for these positions, because maybe what was the man, even the term, you're now the man, sort of illustrates what sort of the perception was of being a boss or a manager or a leader
Yeah.
or just somebody with influence. It's the man. And we can change that. I remember trying to convince somebody on my team to take a job that was a managerial role because I thought they'd be great at it. And they knew their craft so well. And Anita, when you're leading people who have a specific craft, and if you're not an expert in that craft, sometimes there's a little bit of tension. And I just thought, if not you, who? Why wouldn't you want this role? If you don't take this role, this other person's going to get this role. So I really think it's important for more people to strive for these roles. I remember being at Perugia recently, and I was moderating a panel about the new sort of all these new CEOs who had taken roles in the last couple of years, and they were just amazing people who you would not have necessarily seen as CEOs just 10 years ago. And I asked the audience, who here is a CEO? A few hands went up. Who wants to be a CEO? Like crickets. Nobody wants to be a CEO. And Daisy Veerasingham, who was one of the, she's the CEO of the AP. She said, "Hey, you guys should all want to be CEOs. It's a great job." So anyway, I digress a little bit, but the idea of having let's face it, a big corporate role when you wanted to be an artist once upon a time is a very far stretch from what I imagined.
Totally. So interesting. What intrigues you about it now that you've been in corporate media for a while, had leadership roles for a long time? What is it that kind of gets you up in the morning excited about the managerial responsibility, about leading that team, about leading that effort?
Well, I think a lot of the role, a lot of it, when you step into these roles, I always, and I think it's something to consider for others too, spend a lot of time front loading so that in a few years, maybe I won't be needed as much. Maybe my teams run themselves really well. I will be needed, but albeit maybe in a different way. And so now it's just super exciting to wake up and see really great leaders on my own team running the show and continuing to support them and still, obviously still having that bird's eye view to guide them a little bit, but just seeing their own excellence and even of their teams is really fulfilling.
You're touching on something that I also feel very strongly about, that that one of the exciting elements about leadership is empowering others and is lifting up others into these roles. And you are someone who spends a lot of your energy and time doing that with the work you do, for example, in the CUNY executive program as a coach, in other association programs as an instructor, a coach, a mentor. You spent many years as on the board of ONA and as the board chair of ONA on the News Association. Why do you, because I'm sure your days are busy even without the mentoring and coaching, right? How do you make the case to yourself to invest that time and energy in coaching and mentoring?
One aspect in my own job is that it's my job. It's my job. I believe I'm paid to do that. It's increasingly in job descriptions now, but it's my role to do that. But that's the only way we can have successful output. We're not going to produce great work if people are feeling insecure and walking around worrying or walking around not growing. To me, that's a failure. If I haven't let someone grow, to me, over 5 years, I haven't seen any progress in somebody's ability to grow. And look, not everybody wants to be a manager. I think one of the most successful things I've seen has been somebody when I joined a certain organization. I remember somebody coming to me and saying, somebody quite young, like, "Hey, I want to be a manager. I want to be a manager." Why do you want to be a manager? Because you're really good at what you do, and your portfolio, you still have a very little portfolio. Why don't you build your portfolio? But she's like, "No, I want to be a manager." And I'm like, "Okay, but when you become a manager, you're not going to do these cool things all the time. You may have to approve vacations and mitigate conflict." And regardless, that's what she wanted. So we tried to help her get on that track. And then a few years later, she said, "No, I don't want to do that. I just want to make really, really, really great things." And that's really important. And I think that was a fantastic act of leadership from that person, because it's self-awareness, and it's not that one is better than the other. And she's like, this person is still a very influential person in the group.
Yeah. And it's very hard to realize that at some point, right? And to reflect for yourself on, is that really what I want? Or is that just what, the organization, the industry, the ecosystem is telling me what a career is supposed to look like?
That's right. And then the other thing, Anita, not just, I don't invest in people because I'm paid to do it, of course. I love to learn from others too. I don't think there's ever a situation where there's not something I'm learning from somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the amazing things that the mentorship, coaching, support relationship usually goes two ways, right? And you take a lot of that. That's what I've been seeing as well with teaching and coaching. So I totally agree. I think you touched on a super interesting point now by saying, well, I understand this is part of my job, or I made this decision deliberately. And you talked about that colleague of yours who kind of thought she wanted to be a manager, tried it out, and then realized she didn't want to be a manager. Now, that is a very kind of, let me put it that way, a very grown-up way to reflect on these things. The media industry, broadly speaking, does not act as reflected, as grown up when it comes to the decision who becomes a manager. Often people are basically just kind of thrown into these roles because it's the natural kind of career trajectory. At some point, if you want to earn more money, if you have been at a place for a long time, you kind of become a manager. And I think that's where some of our issues come from, that this reflection doesn't take place. Question one, do you see that as well? Do you see it happening? Question two, do you see it changing? Are we getting better at this?
Yes. So I do see it happening. I've had a long career now, so I do think I've seen progress. I think there's a lot more awareness of the importance of being a decent human being. I think there's sometimes a conflict between being a decent human. Okay, let me figure out how to frame this. Sometimes when you're an amazing journalist, your job is to ruffle feathers. Your job is to inquire very aggressively. Your job is to get, your job is that. It's hustling, it's pushing. And plus, some of it doesn't have to be like that. Some of it's also cliche. It comes from a legacy. But I always think about, first of all, so what if you're thrown into a management job? Haven't you learned to be a mature, decent human being outside of your job? Because I do think the skills we carry in our day-to-day lives are also the skills and the traits we bring to our professional lives. I don't see a distinction between that. And I love what you're saying about grown up, because when I think about what is it to be a good leader, to me, it's kind of maturity. It's basically a contemporary modern leader has these traits of maturity, and you can break those down into different levels. Now, having said that, I don't want to be dismissive that some people, we all do need coaching and we all do need training to become more self-aware. But to go from 0 to 1, I think by the point you get to becoming a manager, like if you're being promoted into a role, hopefully you would have put up some of these skills just as being a human in your day-to-day life.
Well, I'd hope so.
But you're right.
Hope so, but
You would hope so. But you're right. And I think sometimes there's a conflict between what our jobs are prior to becoming a manager or becoming a leader. But hell, as you know, as we all know, being a manager is one thing, but being a leader it's not necessarily managing resources. You can be influential without being deemed without being anointed a manager or whatever. It's actually more fun to be influential and just inspire people because of who you are and how you do the work you do.
But sometimes there is no career track for this in organizations, right? Sometimes that means, like I do, like many others do, kind of starting your own thing. If you decide that you spent some time in senior management, you enjoyed it, but you want to have kind of a different phase in your life. Sometimes I feel organizations have an easy time designing the managerial track and basically being like, okay, so these are the steps. And every few years, there is progression. And this is how we pay folks on the managerial track. And this is how we measure success when you're a manager. While it's so much harder to come up with the KPIs and metrics of successful leadership and come up with, the right pay for someone who's leading but not managing. I feel that's sometimes a difficult kind of journey that media organizations are on to a certain extent.
I think that's right. But I also I also notice that people who become indispensable, even if they're not a manager, if they've just established themselves as very powerful people because of their influence, and then the positive outcomes that sort of flow from that influence end up doing okay, through other ways of being promoted or other ways of being rewarded, and even salaries. I think there are plenty of journalists who are paid a lot more than managers in places I work. So
I think it's actually something, if you look at tech and your initial career in tech, that tech has been so much better about than other industries, right? With individual contributors becoming stars, and no one ever expecting them to, join the managerial track or become a manager, right? So I do feel maybe that's an inspiration for the media industry. So Shazna, as you started out as a leader, also as a manager, how important were role models for what you've been doing?
I think role models are fundamental, people to inspire, to look up to. I think a lot about leadership as, if we don't want to abstract it too much, we're just talking about humans here. We're just talking about humans with the aforementioned acts of maturity, moments of maturity. I think I tend to think about it as, not good or bad, but on any given day, we have a spectrum of things that make us good sometimes and not so good sometimes. And I've been lucky enough to have people who've really helped me in my career, people who have given me tools, who've really invested time in me. They've sat me down and helped me come to my own conclusions about self-awareness and about, humility to some degree. So I've learned from them. I've learned from people who've done things that I have not been impressed with as well. I'm seeing somebody in a lot of power just interrupt their staff member again and again as this person is talking. And it makes me think sometimes, oh my God, is that what I do sometimes? I've got to be aware of that and not do that. So I think we can learn both from our people who are our role models, but also sometimes those role models aren't doing as well, or people who aren't very good at it. I also think it's really important to look for role models outside of work.
Yeah.
And we do inevitably. That's sort of an obvious thing to say, whether it's through family, friends, TV stars, characters in books, novels, sports people. Yesterday I had a very deliciously lazy Saturday, and I was watching YouTube clips of Venus and Serena Williams playing tennis on the courts and thinking, wow. And there were all these scenes of Serena in really high pressure moments getting very upset. And I just found her so impressive, and how she came back and apologized for some of that behavior, but some of the struggles that she had to overcome as a Black woman in this incredible role as one of the top tennis players in the world. So I look for inspiration and discipline everywhere. Sometimes we inspire ourselves. Like I remember when I ran the New York Marathon twice, I was like, wow, I'm my own role model right now. I put that work in to get that done. So I think we should be generous too with the idea of role models. We're not talking about perfect humans. We're talking about humans who can consistently show moments of, flashes of, generosity, maturity, self-awareness. They do something that you're really impressed by. I also think that someone I might feel is a great role model is not what you might think, Anita, or that my colleague who works with me might think. I think we pick up on different people at different moments in different ways. So it's a little bit of chemistry at the same time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm totally just like plus oneing that several times. So that's a beautiful, beautiful way to put it. And you just mentioned that obviously throughout your career, you get inspired by role models, by different things. You also learn things about yourself. Can you talk a little bit about some of these things that you learned about yourself as a leader, the things you are good at, the things you enjoy, but maybe also the elements of leadership that you struggle with?
I think I have, just through the virtual experience, I have patience. I know that sometimes things take time, but sometimes I can get impatient as well. So that is that spectrum that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes I'm really good at being patient, and sometimes I'm wondering why. I also worked in philanthropy for a while. And so philanthropy to me is the ultimate long game. You know, you make an investment, you've really got to, the pressures in philanthropy to suddenly like everybody to report immediately on all the amazing impact you've done. But really you don't know what impact is until a long, long, long time afterwards. And so that's really good experience that I need to keep remembering in my day-to-day job, that, you know, change doesn't happen overnight. The problem is the pressures you're getting from above, who are expecting to see all those changes. Anita, you also mentioned to me, we talked earlier about really giving others the limelight, to, you know, putting your people in the limelight, putting them in places to shine.
Yeah.
And I sometimes do wonder, you know, does that hurt me? I think ultimately it's the right thing, but maybe not everybody thinks that, because when you're in a big organization and everyone's jockeying for attention and power to some degree, you've got your people who are really good at marketing themselves. You've got people who really take all the credit for everything. You've got the people, you know, you've got such a spectrum, diversity of personalities. And I tend to work from behind, you know, I coach my people to go and speak out, and then I'll send them a note and say, well done, you did really well. You spoke really well in that meeting. But I wasn't the one speaking. So sometimes I wonder, is that affecting me? But what it reminds me of then is that I have to pay attention to the people on my team who are also working from behind and who I might not be seeing, and not to make assumptions that they are not doing anything. So that is another area where I think my strength, I have to then think about how I'm perceived by that strength of mentoring others rather than putting myself out front, which is that hurting me in the eyes of my bosses? But then that I have to then in reverse make sure I'm treating my team members who are working from behind well and understanding them. So
yeah, you're saying a very big and important thing in a very smart way, because I do feel it sounds so easy, right? It sounds so easy mentoring others and coaching others, but obviously not every large, not even just large, not every organization is rewarding the leadership behaviors that I think we all agree they should be rewarding. Not every organization has kind of a built-in system where they recognize those people quietly working from behind, those people supporting others.
Right.
So do we basically, as you look at it, not just at your organization, but at the media industry as a whole, do we see enough, are organizations rewarding this kind of supportive leadership, coaching and delegating leadership enough? Or are we still in a place where that might be perceived potentially even as weakness, right?
I think we're improving, but we are still a little bit split in that, yes, it's good to delegate, you have to delegate, but at the same time, you have to be a little bit performative. So there's not a world where you can't be performative, I don't think. I have not seen that. And I hear what you're saying about weakness. I think about the word humility. I brought that up once, and humility can sometimes be seen as a weakness. What does it mean to be humble? I want to frame humility as being very generous.
Yeah.
But you can still be proud.
Yeah.
Right? So you can be humble, but very proud and vocal about being very proud. So yeah, to answer your question, I think there's still some work to do there. And, you know, actually I'm the executive sponsor of Asian at DJ, which is one of our affinity groups. And the Asian community do feel the work style is very different to corporate America, which can be loud and brash and performative.
Yeah.
Right? And this idea that, you know, there are people quietly working away and getting things done, but are a little bit invisible. So that is certainly a feeling a lot of that community has. I think too, like with journalists who are actively producing work, the proof is there. The proof is in the work. But when you're someone who's sort of quietly making the trains run, helping stabilize the mood, nobody sees that. When things are going well, it's just normal. It's invisible. When things are going bad, though, then you get in trouble.
Yeah.
So this all comes back to what Anita was saying earlier about the grown-upness the maturity that's required, the increased maturity that's required of all of us. And some of that comes with experience. Some of that needs to be learned. You know, some people might think of it as a little bit new agey. You know, I get that, but maybe new agey is really the lingo. The actions we're talking about are really just decent human being things. You know?
Yeah. Let's stick with that whole overarching topic of decency and, you know, decent human beings for a while, because I really like that notion. I think one area where the last few years have surfaced a lot of conversations about how do you basically create a workspace that's a good place for everyone, that feels inclusive, that respects that there are different cultures, that creates a space of inclusion and belonging for women, for people of color, for folks who come from untraditional backgrounds. So there has definitely been a movement in the past years, obviously triggered by the terrible murder of George Floyd and the reckoning that happened in the industry. But to a certain extent, I think what we are seeing is that with the current layoffs and crisis and tension in the industry, that this attention might be waning. Would you put it that way, or how do you see, if you reflect on the past 3 years of equity and inclusion process in our industry? Where are we today?
Well, I think certainly in those moments of crisis that you just outlined, there was a lot of coverage. So there was a lot of noise, a lot of noise. And I would not want to correlate sort of less maybe noise to nothing happening. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. In my world, I still see very serious programs being rolled out. I see very serious partnerships, fellowships being created. I still see all the players playing out their roles. So I think the jury is still out whether it really has waned or not. But, you know, I mean, right now we have a lot of noise, not noise. I don't mean noise in a negative way, just a lot of energy that is transmitted around the world with these protests in France with the shooting of this young man by a policeman. Yeah. So I guess these topics are still, this stuff is still happening. We're still hearing about it, but maybe the crescendo, that the peak moment of coverage has sort of dipped.
Yeah. But was this an honest reckoning that happened in media organizations across the US, but also across the world? Or was it, to use the word we used before quite often, was it performative in the sense of, we just have to do something about this now?
I think it was a mix of it. I think there was a bit of a PR moment where we have to say these things, and then things were put in place, and maybe some of that's calmed down now. But I do think we made some progress that will stick. But perhaps it wasn't the huge blue sky language that we were using then.
Yeah.
In the same way that the work from home thing. I just saw a colleague the other day, and we were on the Future of Work committee just at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was like, hey, do you remember those meetings? Like, we were going crazy. We were talking about these blue sky things we were going to do. We were going to do this. We were going to do that. And now look, it's sort of just kind of back to normal. So suddenly it's not back to normal, though. Things have changed, but it's not. We went to one extreme, and then I think it has to settle somewhere that is more reasonable for the moment. And we've made some progress. Perhaps it's not the thing that we all hoped for.
It's basically like steering, like oversteering in one direction, then oversteering in the other, and then you kind of find your realistic routines, right?
Yes.
How's the whole new work, remote, hybrid, asynchronous, whatever we might call it? How's that whole thing influencing your work? And how do you what's your perspective on what's going on there?
Look, I can only speak to my own experience. I know everybody has different experiences. I work in a very big newsroom. I've been going to back to it's been required of me to go back to the office every day for over a year now as a senior manager. And for most other people, it's 3 days a week. And generally, I think it's a struggle still for some people.
Yeah.
I can't deny, though, the amazing collaboration that happens and the speed at which we can convey ideas through body language and being together in the same room. I can't underestimate that, especially in these moments of really crazy news. But having said that, I think we'll still see what happens. We'll see what happens. It's not over yet. But I think the hybrid, it's working for me. It's working that I don't mind that my teams aren't here every day.
Yeah.
Here's another thing, we did, Anita, that changed everything. We moved stuff around the office so that instead of the office looking empty all the time because people are in hybrid, we've changed it so that we're all on like the same floor now. And now it feels like it's the same amount of people cycling through, but it feels busy. And I can't deny there is a lovely buzz from busyness.
Yeah.
But it's not always great to do that heads down work, as you know.
But I love what you're saying, Shazna, because I do think there is something about what you just said about like redesigning the office. What you ultimately did is you deliberately then designed for hybrid, right? And I think what I sometimes feel is like the big pain of what happened in the past few years with this kind of struggle of back to the office or not back to the office is that we were using offices that were designed for in-person work and technology that was designed for in-person work and structures and leadership methods that were designed for in-person work. We just were like, okay, let's translate those just without much thought for this kind of new reality. And I think that is where some of the pain comes from, because you can feel that it's not right? You can feel that an empty office where only every 10th desk has someone sitting on it, just doesn't feel buzzy and good and creative. And that has nothing to do with, hybrid or not. It has to do with the design of the office. So maybe we are still stuck in that kind of midway thing.
Yeah, but I do feel that, I felt that there was a bit of an ambient disapproval when somebody wasn't there, right? Even if they were allowed not to be there, there was sort of this ambient idea that you were being judged. I feel that's gone. I do feel that people have felt comfortable that there are going to be people who don't come to the office every day.
But still do their work,
Yeah.
Is there a generational kind of difference you see? When you think about both your teams, but also people, you have so many folks you talk to in the broader industry, is there a generational aspect to whether people want to go back to the office or not, and how they kind of live on that scale?
I have not seen that. I've seen it just very across the board. People have different needs. And I think that's right.
Yeah.
People have different situations, whatever age they are, wherever they're from, they have different needs and requirements. And so the answer is no. I think it really is based on the individual. Some people live 2 hours away and don't want to come in. Some people live 2 hours away because they're earlier in their career and maybe they aren't earning as much.
Yeah.
But some people who are of that younger generation want to come in because they're learning so quickly by sitting next to another expert. So no, I don't see a difference, a marked difference between age groups.
One conversation, and thanks for clarifying that from your perspective. One conversation that has been happening that I also found truly interesting, but also so tricky to solve that riddle, was whether hybrid work or remote work is actually potentially disenfranchising younger folks, but also people of color who might have less, kind of face time in those rooms where powerful decisions are being made. What's your perspective on those angles?
I think, unfortunately, yes. I think it's true. I think that, I think some people do it really well. I think some people can do remote and feel very present. It's a skill. But I do think FaceTime and being in the spaces where decisions are being made does give you an upper hand.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. And even pre-pandemic and pre the conversations about where you work, office or home, that was true too. It was true that if you were working in a satellite office of a big company in the Midwest and headquarters was New York, you do get visibility when you're in headquarters.
Yeah.
You are in the room more. So that's something to think about, you know?
Yeah.
I remember, Anita, we both did the Stanford Fellowship, and I remember taking a very controversial class called Paths to Power. It was very controversial because it was about all the Machiavellian things people do to get power, but it was not judged. It was just seen as a way that people have advanced in their lives and careers in the pursuit of power.
Yeah.
And where you are came up as part of a class, like where you decide to live, where you decide to show up at is part of the paths to power of many people. So meaning being in HQ more often, being at the headquarters, or even abstract it from our current jobs or anything. You know, I sometimes think, I grew up in the poorest borough of London. I, against the odds, actually did quite well, but I can't discount that maybe being in London, being in these cities like London and Paris and New York helped me immensely, because you build a different network there. So even beyond return to work, being in spaces where you have access to resource, people, power, information, opportunity does give you a leg up.
Yeah. I think that's such a fascinating point. And I love that you mentioned power now, because I do feel one of the things that I keep telling my management students is you need to learn the rules of how power works. That doesn't mean that you like them and that you accept them in the long term. And it might mean that you're going to spend all of your life trying to dismantle that system and that structure of power. I actually hope many folks do, because I think there is a lot of things that need to change. But fundamentally understanding how the system works and how organizations work and how stakeholders work and how power works, I think is important if you want to somehow play in that corporate field. And if you want to change things, you first somehow need to understand how things work.
That's right. And also we talked a lot about maturity, this idea of great leadership. Ultimately, it's about maturity.
Yeah.
And I think you become a mature person by exposing yourself to lots of experiences the best you can.
Yeah.
So I feel like some of the best things I've done in my life have been to move countries when I've had an opportunity. They've been to change jobs, change industries when I've had the opportunity. Even places I would never have thought I would live, like Miami. I lived in Miami for 3 years, and it was invaluable to who I am today. So I do hear a lot of the sort of return from the pandemic. You know, we haven't wanted to leave our houses. Some of us don't want to go to the office. Some of us are never going to relocate for a job. And I would just stress, like, if you can, like, relocating is actually, for me, in my experience, has been groundbreaking and transformational to who I am.
Yeah.
You know, from like, especially sitting in New York, cities like New York and London, where you think you're in the center of the universe, and then moving to smaller towns is just so important to see the rest of the world, to see how other people think, how the world is connected. You can connect dots. It's really, really beneficial. So I really hope that people people say yes to relocation sometimes, and that it's not about trying to uninstall somebody, and it's not fair, but actually maybe it's an opportunity sometimes.
Shazna, we are nearly at the end, so I'll ask you a last question that I ask everyone in this podcast. If you could go back in time, talk to young Shazna, the very beginning of her career, what is something that you'd tell your younger self about careers, about leadership, about life?
I would tell young Shazna something she probably would not listen to then, that most of what you're worried about doesn't matter. Most of what you're worried about does not matter. And I can prove it. Everybody listening to this podcast, think about 5 years ago when you were in an awful situation at work and how stressed out you are, how you were. Do you even remember it right now? Do you even remember that in relation to how upset you were? Sometimes yes, but most things no. Most things really don't matter.
Yeah.
And if you can carry that in your day-to-day, you will be so much more protected. And when I say doesn't matter, I don't want to be flippant. Like, things matter. Of course things matter. But in the grand scheme of things, do they really matter?
I love that, Shazna. Beautiful words. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today.
Thanks, Anita.
This was today's episode of Better Leaders. If you enjoyed it, please do follow us and subscribe. Thanks for listening.
Missing link.